This episode of the podcast is brought to you by NutraBio, with no compromise since 1988, no proprietary blends and nothing but clinical dosages, as well as some of the best flavorings on the market. NutraBio has whatever you need, regardless of your sport or transformation. Use code word NATTY at checkout to save 10%. Welcome back to the U-Natty States of America. It's your host here, Brandon Lirio, and I'm here to tell you that politics are rife in bodybuilding, and that's why you will never win a bodybuilding show. Now, most of you guys know that the Natural Olympia was just a couple weeks ago in Las Vegas. Despite my best efforts in what I believe was my best package, whether or not I agree with the judges panel, I was not in first place. Now, scoring third in the world against 20 or 25 of the best guys is actually a pretty big feather in most people's caps. But the reason I wanted to do this podcast was because most of the time, no matter what show it is, no matter what title it is, and no matter how long they've been competing, the first thing we always hear is, I didn't win because politics. Here's the issue with that. Even at my level, you can't just say that and not break down exactly what politics and bodybuilding are and how they're going to affect your career. I'll be the first to say that I've been at shows. I've witnessed shows online. I've even been a competitor in shows where politics may or may not have been involved. So for those of you who don't know, or maybe you're just a little bit ill-advised as to what politics and bodybuilding really means, let's say hypothetically that little Johnny enters a bodybuilding show, and his friend Eric also enters that bodybuilding show. They don't essentially know each other that well, but Eric happens to be seen before the show conversing with the promoter, and then someone walks over to said promoter and head judge and say, forget that little Johnny is better in terms of the judges' criteria, it's little Eric's time to shine. Meaning that regardless of what is shown on stage, the result is already predetermined based on the fact of what either the federation head wants or the head promoter wants. That's incredibly rare. And even in the shows that I believe there may have been bad judging, I don't think that I've been but to maybe 2 or 3 shows and been involved in but one show where I would be able to say that politics was really the major issue. The reason I say that is this. Optics are important. So walking over to the promoter or the head judge and having a conversation right before you're given a universe or a national title or winning your pro card may seem like a bad idea. The problem is that when you're in this sport long enough, even if you're not a competitor but rather are a coach or another promoter, or even just the fact that you've been to that same show year after year after year, you're going to know these people. Take my division at the Natural Olympia, for example. Every person at that judge's table I've either competed with, been at a show where they were in a different division, or they run a version of the federation in a different country that I've basically married myself to. I know all of them. They see me in the hallway at the hotel, they're going to stop to talk to me. I show up on the day of registration, they're going to ask me how I feel, maybe exchange a couple photos, take a look at how my physique is looking. All of those things make perfect sense. It only seems sinister after the fact when someone beats you that you're going to say, well, of course I saw him. He was talking to the judges and the promoters, and of course he won the show. They're friends of mine before they're promoters. I'm friends with Derek Joe, the person who won the Classic Physique division. Does that mean that it was politics, that beforehand we were talking and maybe in some sinister way I was going to throw the event for money so that he could win the Natural Olympia for a second time? No, that's not what it means. And believe me, it hurt just as bad not to win, even if it was to my friend as if it wasn't my friend. But that's not really what this podcast is about. The entire point of this podcast is very simple. It's very easy to look at something and say, I lost because of X. As a matter of fact, as a coach, one of the main things that really kind of blew me away when I started coaching others was the availability of people to be able to compromise their diet in the final week of being able to step on stage. No matter how ready they were, first-time competitors, based on my numbers over the last 12 years, are about 56% more likely to cheat on their peak week diet than any other time throughout the year. Why is that? Well, after a while, I began asking them, what was going through your mind when you decided to cheat on your diet? What were you thinking that entire week as you were really ready for this show and then you decided to kind of just go off the rails? What was interesting was the answers that they gave me, and they all pointed to one thing. They needed to be able to point to something in case they lost, to be able to say, I should have won if I was 100%. But I wasn't, and here's why. And next time, I won't let that happen. So now we extrapolate this to this other argument we're having about bodybuilding and politics. Now granted, as a spectator looking in, you may have a very different perception of politics and when they take place in bodybuilding. That's perfectly understandable and really your own prerogative. But I'm really talking in this podcast about competitors saying these things or talking to people about politics and bodybuilding when that other person may not fully understand the sport. Sometimes it's a lot more comforting to be able to point to something and say, that's why I lost, than going back to your hotel room and washing that tanner off, bringing your best, and looking yourself in the mirror and going, I brought my best, and I was supposed to win. But I didn't. Why didn't I win? When there's no answer at the end of that thread, it doesn't just sting. It sort of can set off an identity crisis as to, what did I do wrong? I looked at the judges' criteria, I followed my coach, I followed my diet, my posing was on point, these photos look great. Why did I lose? Politics is a very convenient answer to saying why you lost. It's very simple to just look at yourself in the mirror and go, well, Derek Joe was friends with one of the head judges who was just right to the head of the head judge, and of course that's why I lost, is because there was politics at play. It might not even just be the fact that it's you ignoring something that you did. Let's double back and really take a look at the sport of bodybuilding. We've talked extensively over the last couple episodes about the subjectivity of the sport, how broad-ranging some of the judges' criteria can be. If you went from one federation to the other in the exact same division, they might be looking for something different. You could go to the same show year after year in the same federation, in the same division, and they'll be looking for something different. But that's not politics, right? What that is the sport changing to decide that it wants something else mixed with the subjectivity of personal preference within bodybuilding and sports. So realistically, when we talk about politics in bodybuilding, you really only need concern yourself with one thing. Not, did the best guy not win? Mistakes are made, and if you go to the Super Bowl every year, it's not always the two best teams that are playing on the field, right? Anybody who watches World's Strongest Man and actually watches the YouTube channels for most of the main guys, they'll say, I didn't expect to win every event. I'm not the greatest strong man in terms of strength in every event, but I'm the greatest strong man in terms of my availability to know what wins. And that's a point spread. Bodybuilding has sort of the same point spread in the terms of you need to appeal to every judge and show them that not only are you their preference, but that you match the preferences of the federation in terms of that division's judging criteria. Politics in bodybuilding can be boiled down to one sentence. Ignore the criteria, comma, ignore your personal preferences, comma, this person is going to win. That's it. If that's not what happened, then you may be able to look at the situation as a whole and decide what did happen. One, you brought your best, but the other guy was just better. That's a very real possibility, and I would say 75 to 80% of the time, that's really what it is. Then there's these other smaller categories. Inept judging, in terms of them not knowing what they're looking for, and usually that means that the judge's scorecard is changing as the show is going on because they're having a look at what the person to their left and right are doing. Then the other side is, you brought your best, and the judges in that federation just are not looking for that, even if that's what their judges' criteria states. And if that's the case, then it might be time to pick a new federation. There's nothing wrong with saying that that federation chooses guys who are, or girls, who are conditioned versus guys and girls who are much bigger. And then there are other federations who do the exact opposite. This is a bodybuilding show. We want to see the biggest, freakiest, just most bodybuilder-esque people. Or women's bikini. We don't care if you have any muscle in your back or arms. We want you to be small, curvy, feminine, good stage presence. Okay. Well, if that's not what you are as a competitor, that doesn't mean that the politics of X federation boned you out of a title, or that you need to call for a boycott because there's some, inept federations out there that are trying to take the titles away from good competitors. You really have to understand. I've always said that bodybuilding is a business, and in that business are going to be, in this case, general contractors. Those general contractors have personal ways of doing things, and in this case, that's going to be judging the competitors on stage. We as competitors have signed a verbal contract with our federation stating that we kind of understand that. We know that there may be a toss back and forth in terms of, does this guy like condition over muscularity? Does this girl like, condition over the fact that she has a great V-taper? I would argue that we'd be much better off in terms of competitors focusing on some real standards in terms of what we believe should be done in terms of how shows are run and how judges are certified. I believe truly that if we had a much greater understanding of how each federation certifies its judges, you would have a lot less people crying politics in bodybuilding. Now, the final caveat to that is this. Politics in bodybuilding are alive and well, and I'm sure that you as a competitor or you as a spectator at some point in your life, if you're listening to this podcast, are going to encounter a show where it happens. But here's the thing. While we all understand that politics in bodybuilding are very real, you also vote with your dollar. So if you continuously go to the same show, whether it be as a competitor or a spectator, and you never agree with the placings, maybe that's just not the stage or the audience seat for you. And then vice versa in terms of bodybuilding as a whole. We then have to ask ourselves, if we believe the judges' criteria was set up correctly, and we believe that this person was the best and we don't know why they didn't win, maybe we then have to take a double back and say to ourselves, did the judges' criteria change? Did the preference of most, or at least some version of a majority of the judges, even on that specific panel, decide before the season started that they were looking for something new in that division? Let's break that down. Because if you go ahead and you take a look at Steve Cook or, Mark Anthony, the guys who are competing in men's physique nowadays are essentially double their size and twice to 3 times as dry. And their stage presence and focus on looking normal beach body is very, very minimal. Classic physique changes in terms of its criteria of its caps of weight and height multiple times in the first 5 years that it's been around. So if really what we're saying is, this is politics in bodybuilding, you have to rule out a lot of things before you're able to have the audacity to come at a grouping of people who are certified by the body that you paid for entrance to and say that you believe that they're corrupt. Corruption in bodybuilding means that we are giving these cards and titles to people who we believe are a better representation that we want for us. Us being a very blanket term that I'm saying us in terms of the head of whatever federation it is that's in your head while you're driving to work or going to get a sick pump or even wasting your life on a cardio piece of equipment right now. That's not really what happens most of the time. So if you're a competitor listening to this, whether you're a new person, whether you have decided that you're going to try to put your foot into bodybuilding next year, or you're a seasoned competitor who's been in 5 years and tried 3 different federations and can't seem to figure out why all the politics are all over the place, you have to ask yourself all the questions that we just went over, right? Is it me? Is it personal preference? Is it multiple federations that have told me the same thing? Is it bad judging? Or is it politics? I'm not saying that politics in bodybuilding is not exactly a huge problem. But what I am saying is this. It's basically like saying that it's a cancer that's run rife through the body of the fitness industry. when really it's maybe 5% of bad promoters. And then think about it this way, those 5% of bad promoters have to then convince every judge on their judges panel to go along with their scheme. There's a saying in the military that we used to have in terms of when I had a top secret clearance. How do you keep a secret between 3 people? You kill 2 of them. If we really believe that it was politics that, let's say, gave Hadi Chopin a loss a couple of years ago at the Olympia, or that gave Big Ramy his win last year, there is 6 to 8 judges. There's promoters who are in the crowd who know those judges, and other promoters who are backstage hands. The tanning people are friends with the Jim Mannion crew, right? So then let's really ask ourselves, are none of them going to say anything at one point in time? I find that very, very hard to believe. And if you want to talk about the last time Kai Green was on stage in Phil Heath, we can have a completely different conversation. But hey, that's another podcast for another time. This episode of the podcast is also brought to you by bgfitonline.com. Battleground Fitness can train you in any sport that is currently on the market, whether it be strongman, powerlifting, stage competitions, and all genders are accepted. So if you have a transformation that you want to make, whether it be on stage, on a platform, or even just in your photos, BG Fit Online has a coach that could help you. So head to www.bgfitonline.com today and start your transformation. Thanks for tuning into the U-Natty States of America this time, guys. Be sure to like, subscribe, and comment anywhere you get your podcasts. And be sure to give us a rating, too. And be sure to put some comments in the comment section about what you want to see next on the U-Natty States of America. Take care, guys.